In the village of Rampur Kheda, the daytime bustle of the fields usually gives way to a heavy, isolated silence after dark. On the night of July 15th, that silence was intensified by a massive thunderstorm that cut power across the district. This brick house sat near the center of the village. It was home to Raghuvir, his wife Savita, and their 19-year-old daughter, Pooja, a family unit that the neighbors had little reason to question. At 11 p.m., Pooja managed to place a final, desperate call to a friend. Her voice was trembling as she gave a single instruction: "If anything happens to me, save my mother." The line cut out before she could explain. When farmers discovered Pooja's body in the agricultural fields the next morning, the physical evidence seemed to tell a familiar story. Local police initially categorized it as a random assault by outsiders, a theory supported by the bruised state of the body and its location away from the home. This narrative took hold instantly. Crowds gathered in the streets to demand the arrest of local youths known for harassing women, effectively framing the crime as a community-wide threat from the outside before the medical examiner had even begun the autopsy. Inspector Abhishek Yadav received the postmortem report 48 hours later. The findings immediately diverged from the village's assumptions. The coroner fixed the time of death between 10 and 11 p.m. This aligned exactly with Pooja's final phone call, confirming that she was killed moments after she pleaded for her mother's safety. The initial examination focused on these fresh lacerations, which caused the fatal trauma. But as the examiner looked closer, they found something the police at the scene had missed. Healed scars and fading bruises were layered beneath the new injuries. These weren't the result of a single, spontaneous struggle in a field. They were the physical record of violence that had been occurring for months. The autopsy shifted the search. Investigators were no longer looking for a random attacker, but for someone with consistent, private access to the victim over a long period. Inspector Yadav moved the investigation from the external fields back to the family courtyard. Raghuvir's behavior during the interrogation was notably detached. Despite his reputation in the village as a volatile man with a quick temper, he showed no signs of grief or distress while discussing his daughter's death. In contrast, Savita appeared paralyzed. She refused to meet the inspector's eyes, constantly glancing toward her husband before answering even the simplest questions. Her silence was a product of visible terror rather than mourning. This domestic tension led police to analyze Pooja's phone. They recovered a hidden audio file where Pooja can be heard crying and begging her father to please leave her alone, promising she would never tell anyone about the abuse. The household functioned as a closed system. Raghuvir used his role as the family patriarch to enforce a silence that allowed the abuse to continue, using the mother's fear to ensure no one outside the walls ever heard what was happening. The final break in the case came from a local youth named Deepak. He came forward to reveal that Pooja had anticipated her own death, telling him that if she ever disappeared, her family would be the cause. Deepak handed over Pooja's secret diary, smuggled out for safekeeping. The entries describe constant surveillance and physical pain. In one passage, she described the house not as a home, but as a place more frightening than a jail cell. The dates in the diary matched the healing stages of the injuries documented in the autopsy report. The written record and the medical record were identical. Recognizing that she could not rely on her family for protection, Pooja had intentionally moved her testimony into the hands of a neighbor. She ensured that her account of the abuse would exist even if she could no longer speak. On the night of July 15th, Pooja threatened to take her evidence to the police. Raghuvir responded by strangling her, ending the threat of exposure within the walls of the house. He then moved her body to the fields to mimic the appearance of an outsider crime. It was a deliberate attempt to redirect the investigation away from the home and toward the stranger danger the village already feared. When confronted with the audio recording, the diary, and the medical map in court, Raghuvir's defense collapsed. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Savita remained the final witness to the tragedy. Her long-term silence, maintained under the threat of her husband's violence, ultimately resulted in the loss of her daughter. Investigative data consistently shows that for many vulnerable people, the greatest threat is not a stranger in the dark or a predator in the fields. The most dangerous individual is often the one who has a key to the front door.